Something changed in the quiet of that house last night, and the person you love has not been able to think the same way since. It began with a conversation they never planned to have, a name they had promised themselves they would not say aloud, and one question from their mother that reached beneath every defense they had carefully built. Your name entered the room softly, almost accidentally, but once it was spoken, the truth could no longer remain hidden. The evening had already grown still. A single lamp glowed beside the couch, casting warm light across framed photographs and familiar furniture. Their mother sat with a cup of tea cooling between her hands while the person you love stood near the window, pretending to watch the darkness outside. They had arrived carrying more than their usual silence. Their shoulders were tense. Their answers were brief. Every few moments, they checked their phone, not because a message had appeared, but because they were secretly hoping one might. Their mother noticed. Mothers often recognize the weight of an untold story before they know its name. She did not immediately question them. She allowed the silence to settle, listening to the clock in the hallway and the faint tapping of rain against the glass. Then, with the calmness of someone who had already understood more than had been explained, she asked, "Is this about the person you keep pretending you're over?" The person you love froze. They could have laughed. They could have denied it. They could have changed the subject and hidden behind the ordinary details of the day. Instead, they looked down at the phone resting in their hand, and for the first time in weeks, they stopped pretending that the distance between you had made their feelings disappear. "How did you know?" they whispered. Their mother did not answer immediately. She placed her cup on the table and looked at them with an expression that was neither accusing nor surprised. It was the expression of someone who had watched them carry an invisible conversation everywhere they went. She had seen the distracted pauses at dinner. She had heard them walking through the house late at night. She had noticed how their face changed whenever someone mentioned love, timing, regret, or second chances. "You say their name without saying it," she replied. That sentence opened something inside them. They sat down slowly, not beside her but across from her, as though they needed the space to decide how much truth they could survive revealing. At first, they spoke carefully. They described you in fragments. The way you noticed small things. The way your presence had made ordinary moments feel important. The way you sometimes understood what they meant before they found the courage to say it. But beneath every tender memory was a question they had not been able to answer. If what existed between you was real, why had fear been allowed to speak louder than love? Their mother listened without interrupting. The person you love told her about the moment they began pulling away. It had not happened because they stopped caring. It had happened because caring had started to feel dangerous. You had seen parts of them that they usually kept hidden, the uncertain part, the wounded part, the part that still expected beautiful things to vanish without warning. Every time you moved closer, they felt both relief and panic. They confessed that they had misunderstood their own fear. They thought fear meant something was wrong between you. They did not realize it might have meant something was finally becoming real. Their mother leaned forward. "Did they hurt you?" The question hung between them. The person you love opened their mouth, but no answer came. Their eyes shifted toward the rain-darkened window. They remembered every disagreement, every unanswered message, every moment when your pain had collided with their silence. They remembered words spoken defensively and words never spoken at all. "No," they finally said. "Not in the way I told myself." That admission changed the air in the room. Until that moment, they had organized the story in a way that protected them. They had focused on the misunderstandings. They had repeated the moments that made distance seem reasonable. They had told themselves that you wanted too much, felt too deeply, or expected something they were not ready to give. But sitting across from their mother, those explanations began to sound incomplete. They admitted that you had not asked them to be perfect. You had asked them to be honest. You had not demanded certainty about the future. You had wanted clarity about the present. You had not tried to control them. You had simply wanted to know whether the tenderness in their actions meant what it seemed to mean. And the person you love had known the answer. They had known it every time your name lit up their screen and their heart responded before their mind could interfere. They had known it when they imagined telling you something important before anyone else. They had known it when good news felt unfinished because you were not there to hear it. Their mother watched their face carefully. Then she asked the question they had been avoiding most. "Do you love them?" This time, the person you love did not look away. Their eyes filled before they could control them. They pressed their lips together, trying to keep their voice steady, but the truth had already appeared in their expression. "Yes," they said. "I think I have for longer than I wanted to admit." Their mother closed her eyes. That response startled them. They had expected advice. Perhaps a warning about protecting their heart. Perhaps a reminder that love could be complicated. They did not expect their mother to look as though those words had touched an old grief of her own. When she opened her eyes again, there were tears in them. The person you love moved forward. "Why are you crying?" Their mother reached for their hand, but instead of answering, she studied the lines of their face as if searching for someone she had known many years before. The silence became heavier, not frightening, but charged with a meaning that had not yet been revealed. Then she said, "Because I know what it looks like when someone is about to lose the person they love for a reason that will not matter later." The person you love stared at her. Their mother had rarely spoken about her own past. She had told stories about responsibilities, choices, and the years that shaped her, but never about the private sorrow beneath them. Now, in the warm light of that living room, she began telling a story the person you love had never heard. Long before the life they knew, their mother had loved someone deeply. It was not a dramatic love filled with grand promises. It had been quiet and steady. They shared books, long walks, and ordinary plans that slowly began to resemble a future. But when the relationship became serious, fear entered. Family expectations grew louder. Doubt became easier to obey than hope. She had waited for certainty before choosing love. Certainty never came. Instead, the person she loved eventually stopped asking to be chosen. Their mother described the final conversation with painful precision. A train station. A gray morning. A suitcase at someone's feet. Words that sounded temporary but became permanent. She had believed there would be another chance after she became braver, after life became simpler, after everyone else approved. There was no other chance. The person you love listened without moving. Their mother's tears did not fall dramatically. They gathered slowly, carrying the weight of a memory that had remained untouched for years. She explained that she did not regret the life she later built, and she would never erase the people she loved. But part of becoming older was learning that gratitude and regret could exist in the same heart. There are choices that lead to good lives, she said softly. And there are still moments when you wonder what truth you abandoned to get there. The person you love lowered their head. For the first time, they saw their own hesitation not as protection but as a possible decision with consequences. Until then, they had imagined you remaining emotionally available while they figured themselves out. They had unconsciously believed your heart would stay where they left it. But love does not always remain waiting in the same doorway. Their mother asked how long it had been since they had spoken honestly with you. They gave her an answer that made her expression change. It had been longer than she expected. There had been small exchanges, incomplete conversations, messages typed and deleted, moments when one of you almost crossed the distance. But the real conversation, the one where neither person hid behind pride, timing, or careful language, had never happened. Their mother squeezed their hand. And what do you think they believe now? That question struck deeper than all the others. The person you love had spent so much time studying their own confusion that they had barely allowed themselves to imagine your interpretation. What did you believe their silence meant? Did you think the connection had been one-sided? Did you assume the tenderness was temporary? Had you started questioning your own intuition because they lacked the courage to confirm what you felt? They whispered, "They probably think I never cared enough." Their mother's face softened with unmistakable sadness. And is that true? No. Then why are you allowing that to be the story they carry? The person you love could not answer. They stood and walked toward the window again, but now the glass reflected their face back at them. They saw someone exhausted from maintaining an emotional distance that had never brought peace. They had believed silence would make the situation less complicated, yet silence had followed them into every room. Their mother rose and joined them. She did not tell them to call you immediately. She did not romanticize the uncertainty or promise that everything would be repaired with one confession. She understood that you had your own feelings, your own boundaries, and perhaps wounds that could not simply be erased. Instead, she said, you cannot control how the truth will be received. But you are responsible for whether the truth is ever given a chance. Those words stayed with them. The person you love looked down at their phone. Your conversation was still there. They had opened it many times, scrolling through messages that once felt ordinary but now seemed filled with clues. A joke you had sent after a difficult day. A quiet goodnight. A moment when you had asked whether everything was okay, and they had replied with a single word instead of telling you that your kindness frightened them because they were beginning to depend on it. Their thumb hovered over your name. Then their mother asked, what was the last thing they said to you? The person you love searched through the messages until they found it. The screen illuminated their face. They read silently at first. Then their breathing changed. Your last meaningful message had not been angry. That made it harder to bear. You had not accused them or demanded an explanation. You had written with a tenderness that now felt almost unbearable. You had told them you respected whatever space they needed, but you could not keep standing in a place where your heart was welcomed one day and treated like a burden the next. You had said you cared deeply, yet you were beginning to understand that love also required self-respect. Their mother read the message with permission. By the time she reached the final line, her hand rose to her mouth. The person you love watched her, suddenly afraid of what she saw in your words. Their mother read the final sentence once more slowly this time. I hope one day you stop running from the very things you keep praying to find. The room fell silent. Their mother sat down again, but now her tears were no longer only about her own past. She was crying because she recognized something in you. Not perfection. Not destiny guaranteed by signs or wishes. She recognized emotional courage, the kind she herself had once been offered and had been too afraid to meet. She loved you honestly, their mother whispered. The person you love flinched at the past tense. Loves, they corrected instinctively. Their mother looked up. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. That single correction revealed what the person you love still believed. Somewhere beneath the doubt, they felt your connection had not completely disappeared. But belief was not proof, and hope could not be used as an excuse to delay action. Their mother asked whether there was something else they had not told her. The person you love became still. Until then, they had shared nearly everything: their fear, their feelings, the distance, your final message. But one truth remained hidden. It was the reason they had come to that house in the first place. It was the reason their hands had been shaking before their mother asked the first question. Earlier that day, they had learned something about you. Not from gossip. Not from someone trying to create conflict. It came from a mutual acquaintance who had spoken your name without knowing the impact it would have. The person had mentioned that you seemed different lately, quieter, stronger, more resolved. You had begun making plans that did not include waiting for anyone to decide your worth. And there was more. You had received an opportunity that could take you somewhere new. The person you love had not been told all the details, only that a decision was approaching quickly. A different city. A fresh beginning. A chance to leave behind the places and patterns that had kept you emotionally suspended. Their mother's eyes widened. When are they leaving? I don't know, the person you love answered. Do they know how you feel? No. Then what are you waiting for? The person you love looked at the phone again. Their fear had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. Before, they feared speaking. Now they feared what silence might cost. Their mother reached for the phone, not to take it, but to close their trembling fingers around it. Tell them the truth, she said. Not to stop them from living. Not to pressure them into choosing you. Tell them because they deserve to know that what they felt was real. The person you love nodded, but tears had begun falling now. They opened your message thread. They typed 3 words. Then deleted them. They tried again, this time writing a longer sentence, but it sounded too formal. Another attempt sounded desperate. They wanted to explain everything: the fear, the love, the regret, the conversation with their mother, but every sentence seemed too small for what had been left unsaid. Their mother watched silently. Finally, the person you love pressed the microphone icon instead. Their voice shook as they began recording. They said your name. They paused. Then they told you they were sorry not for loving you, but for making their love feel like uncertainty. They admitted that their distance had never reflected your value. They confessed that they had been afraid of needing someone whose absence could hurt them. Their mother turned away, giving them privacy while remaining close enough to lend courage. The recording continued. The person you love told you about the nights they nearly called. They spoke about how often they searched for your presence in places you had never been. They admitted that every attempt to move forward had only shown them how deeply you had become part of their inner world. Then they reached the most important words. I don't know what you've decided, they said. And I know I may be too late. But before you begin a life where I am no longer part of the possibility, you deserve to know that I love you. I have loved you through every silence I created. I was just too afraid to become the person brave enough to say it. Their finger hovered above the send button. Their mother stood behind them, tears shining in her eyes. Send it, she whispered. The person you love closed their eyes. And just as they were about to release the message, a notification appeared at the top of the screen. It was from you. Only one line was visible. I need to tell you something before I leave. The person you love stopped breathing for a moment. They opened your message. But what you wrote next was not what either of them expected. The message was longer than the preview suggested. The person you love stared at the screen while their mother remained just behind them, close enough to feel the sudden change in their breathing. For a moment, neither of them moved. The room seemed to shrink around that glowing rectangle of light, as though everything outside it, the rain, the clock, the unfinished tea, had become distant and unimportant. Your words began simply. You told them you had wanted to speak before leaving, not because you expected an answer, but because you did not want the final memory between you to be silence. You admitted that you had spent too long trying to decide whether reaching out would protect your heart or reopen it. In the end, you had chosen honesty, not because you felt fearless, but because you were tired of allowing fear to make decisions for you. The person you love read that sentence twice. It sounded painfully familiar. Across the room, their mother watched the realization move over their face. Until then, they had thought they were the only one struggling between courage and self-protection. Now they understood that you had been fighting your own private battle, one they had never paused long enough to imagine. They continued reading. You explained that the opportunity you had received was real. It had arrived unexpectedly, at a time when you had nearly stopped believing anything new could find you. The offer would require you to leave familiar surroundings and begin again somewhere you had no history, no reputation, and no emotional promises left unfinished. You had not accepted yet. The deadline was close. That single detail sent a quiet shock through the person you love. They had assumed your decision was already made. They had pictured you packing, closing doors, and moving beyond their reach while they stood helplessly behind the consequences of their hesitation. But now there was still time, not necessarily to change your choice, but to finally tell the truth before the choice was made. Their mother asked, "What else did they say?" The person you love did not answer. Their eyes had already reached the next part. You wrote that leaving was not the hardest thing. The hardest thing was knowing you might carry unanswered questions with you. You did not know whether what existed between you had been real or merely meaningful to you. You did not know whether their silence came from indifference, fear, confusion, or a decision they never had the courage to name. Then came the sentence that broke something open inside them. I can survive not being chosen. What has been harder is not knowing whether there was ever a choice at all. The phone trembled in their hand. Their mother sat beside them now. The person you love lowered the screen, pressing their free hand against their mouth. They had never understood the full weight of their ambiguity. They thought they had avoided hurting you by refusing to make promises. But their refusal to speak had not created safety. It had created a space where you were forced to question your own perception. They had allowed you to wonder whether you had imagined the closeness. And that knowledge hurt more than any accusation could have. Their mother said nothing. She did not soften the truth or rescue them from it. She simply remained present while they faced the emotional cost of every unfinished conversation. After several moments, they lifted the phone again. You continued by saying that you were not writing to ask them to stop you. You did not want a dramatic declaration inspired only by the fear of losing access to you. You had learned the difference between being wanted and being valued. One could rise suddenly when distance became real. The other showed itself through consistency, vulnerability, and the willingness to be known. The person you love closed their eyes. You had named the exact fear they had created. If they confessed now, would you believe them? Or would every word sound like panic because you were preparing to leave? The voice recording they had made was still waiting beneath your message, unsent. Their mother noticed it. Did you finish what you were saying? She asked. Yes. Was it true before this message arrived? The person you love looked at her. Yes. Then the timing does not make it false. That answer gave them strength, but it did not erase the consequences. They understood that truth spoken late was still truth, yet lateness could change what another heart was able to do with it. They returned to your message. You told them that one memory had followed you through the weeks of distance. It was not the most romantic moment between you, nor the most dramatic. It was an ordinary afternoon when the two of you had been sitting in a parked car while the world moved around you. You had said something vulnerable, expecting it to be dismissed. Instead, they had listened. They had not offered advice. They had not interrupted. They had simply reached over and taken your hand. That moment had remained with you because it felt like the beginning of something honest. No performance. No carefully chosen language. Just two people allowing themselves to be seen. The person you love remembered it immediately. They could still see the muted sunlight across the dashboard. They remembered the sound of traffic beyond the closed windows and the way your fingers hesitated before holding theirs. They had spent months trying to forget larger memories, but this small one returned with startling clarity. Their mother saw recognition in their expression. That was when I knew, they whispered. When you knew what? That I could love them. The words were quieter than before, but more certain. The first confession had been forced through regret and urgency. This one came from memory. It revealed something deeper. their love had not appeared suddenly when your departure became possible. It had begun much earlier, in a moment so gentle that fear had almost disguised it. They scrolled further. You wrote that you did not regret loving them. You regretted the ways you had abandoned yourself while trying to make room for their uncertainty. You had made excuses for silence that hurt you. You had treated emotional confusion as though it were proof of depth. You had waited for small signs and called them progress because accepting the larger truth felt unbearable. But something had changed in you. You no longer wanted love that required constant interpretation. The person you love read those words slowly. They did not feel rejected by them. They felt confronted by the kind of clarity they had avoided. You were no longer writing from the place where they had left you. You had grown beyond the version of yourself who waited quietly for reassurance. And strangely, that made them love you more. Not because you were harder to reach, but because you had become more honest with yourself. Their mother asked, "Are you afraid they've changed?" The person you love looked toward the dark window. "No," they said. "I'm afraid they changed because I wouldn't." That truth settled heavily between them. Your message continued. You said that part of you still cared deeply, but caring was no longer enough to determine your future. You had spent too many nights measuring your worth against another person's willingness to speak. The opportunity before you felt like more than work or relocation. It felt like a test of whether you truly believed your life could move forward without receiving every answer you once thought you needed. Then you wrote something that made the person you love sit upright. You had spoken to someone before sending the message. Not about the opportunity. About them. Their mother noticed the sudden tension. Who? The person you love kept reading. You explained that earlier that day, you had visited someone who knew you both not closely, but well enough to have observed more than either of you realized. This person had seen the beginning of your connection. They had witnessed the way the person you love searched for you in crowded rooms, the way their attention changed when you entered, and the way they became guarded whenever anyone came too close to naming what was happening. For months, this person had remained silent. But when you mentioned leaving, they finally told you something. The person you love stopped reading. Their mother leaned closer. What did they tell them? The answer came in the next lines. You had been told that the person you love once defended you in a conversation you never knew happened. It had taken place after a misunderstanding between you, during the period when your connection began to fracture. Someone had spoken about you unfairly, reducing your emotions to neediness and your honesty to pressure. The person you love, who had been publicly distant at the time, refused to let the comment stand. They said, "You don't know what they carried before they met me. And you don't know how much courage it took for them to trust me." The person you love's face changed. They had never expected you to hear about that moment. Their mother asked what had happened, and they explained. The conversation had taken place in a hallway after an event. They had been angry with themselves, confused about you, and unwilling to admit how deeply they cared. But when someone questioned your character, something in them reacted before fear could intervene. They had defended the truth about you even while hiding the truth about themselves. You wrote that hearing this had unsettled you. For weeks, you had believed they saw your vulnerability as a burden. Now you knew that, at least once, they had understood exactly what it cost you to offer it. That did not erase the pain, but it complicated the story you had been using to let go. The person you love read the next line aloud. Knowing you understood me makes your silence harder to accept. Their voice broke. Their mother reached for their arm. This was the deepest wound of all. You could have forgiven ignorance more easily. But the person you love had not been ignorant. They knew your history. They knew trust was not easy for you. They knew your openness was not casual. And still, they withdrew without explanation. Their mother's eyes filled again, but this time her expression was different. There was compassion in it, yet also a quiet insistence that they not hide from the damage simply because they had never intended to cause it. "Why didn't you tell them what was happening inside you?" she asked. The person you love stared at the floor. "Because if I said it out loud, I would have had to make a decision." "And silence allowed you to avoid one?" "For a while." Their mother shook her head gently. "No. Silence made the decision. It just made it without your courage." The person you love absorbed those words in stillness. The rain had weakened outside. Water slid down the glass in thin, silver lines. Somewhere in the house, an appliance clicked off, leaving the room even quieter than before. They reached the final section of your message. You told them that you had not decided whether to accept the offer. You would make that choice the following evening. Before then, you wanted one honest conversation, not to demand commitment, and not to recreate the past, but to understand whether there was anything real left to speak about. You asked them not to answer immediately if all they felt was panic. You asked them not to say what they thought would keep you near. You asked them to look beneath the fear of losing you and decide whether they were truly willing to build something different from what had already hurt you. Then you wrote, "If there is something you have never told me, tomorrow is the time. After that, I need to choose my life without waiting for the words you might someday say." The person you love reached the end. There was no goodbye. Only a time and a place. Tomorrow evening. The same quiet cafe where the two of you had first spoken for hours without noticing the tables empty around you. Their mother exhaled slowly. "You have your chance," she said. The person you love looked at the unsent voice recording. "No," they replied. "I have a conversation. A chance would mean they owe me openness. They don't." Their mother's expression softened with pride. Something had already begun changing in them. Not the feelings those had been there. The change was in their understanding of love. They were no longer thinking only about what they might lose. They were beginning to think about what you needed in order to feel safe enough to listen. They deleted the voice recording. Their mother looked surprised. "I need to say it to their face," they explained. "And I need to hear whatever they say afterward." This was not avoidance. It was the first decision they had made without hiding behind distance. They sent a simple reply. "I'll be there. And this time, I won't leave anything unclear." The message showed as delivered. Then, almost immediately, it showed as read. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. The person you love held their breath, but no reply came. Their mother placed a hand on their shoulder. "Let them have tonight." They nodded. Yet something still troubled them. The person who had told you about the hallway conversation had shared only part of what happened that day. There had been another moment, one the person you love had never told anyone, not even their mother. After defending you, they had stepped outside alone. They had taken out their phone and written a message they never sent. A message containing the promise they were too frightened to make. The draft had remained saved for months. Until 3 days ago, when they accidentally discovered it again. The person you love unlocked their phone and searched through an old folder. Their mother watched as they found the message, its date glowing above words written by a version of them who had known the truth before everything fell apart. They read it silently. Then their mother asked to see. The message said, "I don't know how to do this without fear, but I know I don't want a future where you become someone I almost chose." Their mother covered her mouth. "Why didn't you send it?" The person you love looked at the timestamp. Because less than an hour after writing it, they had received another message, one that changed the way they understood everything. A message about you. They had believed it. And that message had been the real reason they pulled away. Their mother's voice became cautious. "What did it say?" The person you love opened the old conversation. The sender's name appeared at the top of the screen. Their mother recognized it immediately. Her face lost its color. Because the message had not come from a stranger, a mutual friend, or someone casually involved in your story. It had come from someone their mother had trusted for years. And when she saw the name, she whispered something that made the person you love turn toward her in shock. "That person lied to me about your father, too." The room became impossibly still. The person you love looked from the old message to their mother, searching her face for some sign that they had misunderstood what she had just said. But there was no confusion in her eyes, only the quiet sorrow of someone recognizing a painful pattern much later than they wished they had. She slowly sat down. "I never wanted you to carry my unfinished stories," she said softly, "but there is something you deserve to know before tomorrow." Years earlier, long before the life her child had always known, there had been someone who delighted in creating doubt between people. Not through dramatic lies that were easily exposed, but through carefully chosen half-truths whispered at exactly the right moment. Friendships had ended because of those whispers. Relationships had weakened. Trust had quietly dissolved while no one realized where the poison had begun. She had eventually learned the truth. But by then, some doors had already closed. When she saw the sender's name on that old message, the memories returned immediately. The person you love finally opened it. The words were short, believable, and devastating. They claimed you had admitted you were no longer serious about the relationship. They suggested you had only stayed close because you felt guilty. They warned that you were already planning a future without them and that confronting you would only bring embarrassment. At the time, those sentences had landed directly on top of every insecurity they already carried. Instead of asking you whether they were true, they accepted them as confirmation of the fears already living inside them. Looking back now, they realized something heartbreaking. Nothing in that message sounded like you. It only sounded like their fear. Their mother gently closed the phone. "Fear has an unusual habit," she whispered. It believes whatever allows it to hide. Those words settled deeply. For the first time, the person you love stopped blaming timing, misunderstanding, or fate. The greatest distance between you had not been created by circumstance. It had been created by assumptions that neither of you deserved. One had feared speaking. The other had grown tired of waiting. Neither heart had stopped caring. Both had simply become exhausted. Morning arrived slowly. The rain had disappeared, leaving the streets washed clean beneath soft golden light. The person you love barely slept. They spent the early hours thinking not about finding perfect words, but about becoming an honest person. For the first time in months, they stopped rehearsing conversations designed to protect themselves. Instead, they prepared to tell the truth, even if the truth did not guarantee the ending they hoped for. Their mother watched them leave the house. Before they stepped outside, she embraced them tightly. She did not say, "Bring them back." She did not say, "Everything will work out." Instead, she smiled through gentle tears. Go with an open heart. Listen as much as you speak. Love is not proven by convincing someone to stay. Love is proven by finally becoming someone who can be trusted with another person's heart. Those words stayed with them the entire drive. When they reached the cafe, it looked almost exactly as it had the first time you met there. The same wooden tables. The same quiet music. The same sunlight resting against the windows. Only the two people walking toward one another had changed. You arrived carrying quiet confidence. Not the confidence of someone untouched by pain, but of someone who had survived it honestly. The person you love immediately noticed the difference. Your shoulders no longer carried the weight of waiting. Your smile was gentle, but careful. When your eyes met, neither of you rushed forward. Neither of you hid. You simply stood there for a long moment, allowing reality to replace imagination. Finally, you sat together. For several seconds neither of you spoke. Then the person you love quietly broke the silence. I owe you the truth before I ask for anything. You nodded. I know. They took a slow breath. Every wall they had built over the months fell away one sentence at a time. They told you about the fear that made closeness feel dangerous. They admitted believing a message they should never have accepted without speaking to you. They confessed that every silent day afterward became harder than the one before, yet shame convinced them it was already too late. Then they looked directly into your eyes. I wasn't protecting myself from losing you. Their voice trembled. I was protecting myself from discovering how much I already loved you. No excuses followed. No attempt to minimize the hurt. Only truth. You listened without interruption. When they finished, you remained silent for several moments. Not because you were deciding whether they deserved forgiveness. Because you were allowing yourself to feel the difference between explanation and accountability. Finally, you spoke. I don't need you to erase what happened. Your voice was calm. I needed to know whether you understood why it hurt. Without hesitation, they answered. Yes. And do you understand that trusting you again would take time? Yes. And if I need that time, will you disappear again? The question lingered between you. This was not about romance. It was about reliability. The person you love answered without rushing. No. It was a simple word. But unlike all the complicated promises they once imagined making, this one carried no performance. Only commitment. You studied them carefully. Then something unexpected happened. You smiled. Not because every wound had instantly healed. Not because every uncertainty had vanished. You smiled because, for the first time since everything fell apart, you no longer felt as though you were speaking to someone hiding behind fear. You were speaking to someone willing to remain present. You reached into your bag and placed a folded envelope on the table. I almost threw this away. They opened it carefully. Inside was the letter you had planned to leave behind if they never answered. It wasn't filled with anger. It wasn't filled with blame. It was filled with gratitude. You thanked them for the beautiful moments you shared. You admitted they had helped you grow stronger than either of you realized. And at the very end, you had written one sentence. If our paths ever cross again, I hope we meet as two people who have learned that honesty is kinder than fear. The person you love looked up with tears shining in their eyes. We already have. You laughed softly through your own tears. So we have. Outside the cafe, life continued as always. People walked past without knowing that two hearts had just laid down burdens they had carried for far too long. The future still contained unknowns. The opportunity before you still existed. The distance you had traveled emotionally could not disappear in a single afternoon. But something far more important had happened. Truth had finally entered the story. Whatever came next would no longer be built on assumptions. It would be built on honesty. You both left the cafe together not because every answer had arrived, but because both of you chose to take the next step with open hearts instead of hidden fears. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not that love appears. It is that two people finally become brave enough to meet it without disguises. And perhaps that is the quiet reminder hidden within this story. The conversations we postpone often become the ones that shape our lives. The truths we fear speaking are sometimes the very truths that set weary hearts free. If this message found you at exactly the moment you needed hope, may you find the courage to replace fear with honesty, silence with compassion, and regret with wisdom. May your heart be guided toward peace, your relationships be strengthened by truth, and your path be filled with grace, healing, and unexpected joy. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who may need this reminder today. Until next time, may love always find you where truth is welcome, and may every new beginning lead you closer to the peace your heart has been seeking.